This is the third and final video on animal behavior. And again, we're going to take an ultimate approach, trying to understand the adaptive nature of certain behaviors. And we're going to, in this lecture, investigate mate choice, mating systems, parental care, and social interactions, and the adaptive nature of these behaviors and how they can increase fitness. The first thing that we want to talk about is mate choice and reproductive tactics in males and females. While both males and females have the same evolutionary goal, remember we talked about that a few lectures back, the evolutionary goal of all organisms is to pass on as many copies of your genes as possible. But females and males have different tactics for achieving this goal. And oftentimes we can see that there can be conflict between what may be best for the male and what may be best for the female. So why do these differences exist? Well, this is due in part, at least, to the different reproductive potentials of males and females. And the basis for this springs from anisogamy. Anisogamy is based in the fact that there is a huge difference in the size and investment in female gametes versus male gametes. Sperm are small, males can make billions of them, so each one is a relatively small investment. Now compared to that, from the female's perspective, eggs are much larger. They can produce fewer of them because there are limited resources and time to make the egg. So each one represents a relatively large investment. And this is going to greatly influence how males and females approach reproduction. So let's look at it from the male perspective first. Compared to females, males have a much higher relative potential for increasing their reproductive success. Typically, they're not sperm limited, and a single male can fertilize lots of females in the population. So the male tactic is typically to mate with as many females as possible to maximize the number of ova that he can fertilize. So that means males typically are less choosy when selecting a mate. Sperm is cheap, mating is relatively fast in most species, so there's nothing to lose by mating with every female that's willing. Male reproductive success is typically limited by the number of females mated. Now, an extrapolation of that means that males typically want to avoid long-term commitments that may limit their ability to mate with multiple females. So while we humans tend to think that we and most other animals are in monogamous relationships, the truth of the matter is that monogamy is really rare in the animal kingdom. Well, let's look at it from the perspective of females now. Females are typically very choosy. Each of the eggs that they produce are costly, they have a limited supply of them. So female reproductive success is not driven as much by quantity like it is in males, but now, since you're limited in number, reproductive success is driven by quality of the offspring produced, which means you need to make sure that you use your valuable eggs and only combine them with the most valuable sperm possible. So they only want to mate with the highest quality males. That way they get the best genes, potentially the best resources if these males are defending all-purpose territories. The males may actually provide some safety, some individual defense, and in some cases, rarely, males will potentially provide parental care. So by picking the highest quality males, this gives the offspring the best chance of survival and subsequent reproduction, and it increases the fitness or reproductive success of the females that are successful in mating with these high-quality males. So typically females have little advantage to mate with multiple males. They don't really gain in quantity nearly as much as just making sure that they have the highest quality. And remember, when we talked about communication in animals, we discussed the fact that females tend to be choosy in mate choice, and one of the things they're paying attention to are elaborate, bright, colorful traits or traits that indicate health in the males. And so these guppies here, the bright colorations are seen in males. The males are showing these honest signals saying, look how bright I am, I'm really healthy, I'm not sick, you should choose me. Same thing with these anoles here. The males with the brightest red dewlap, this lower flap, is an indication to the female, look, I have a really good diet, I don't have parasites, I'm healthy, you should mate with me because I have the best genes for transferring these successful traits to your offspring. So this leads to a discussion of a different type of selection. We've already discussed natural selection, but sexual selection is a special category similar to natural selection, but in this case the traits that are involved are those whose sole purpose is to increase mating success. So males oftentimes have elaborate ornaments, weapons, elaborate displays to either help them in competitions with other males directly in fights, or bright colorations or fancy dances to convince a female, look how healthy I am, you should mate with me. And sometimes these traits actually lead to reduced survival probabilities. So they're not really good natural selection based traits, but because the reduced survivalship is compensated by having increased mating success, that's what drives the evolution of the trait. So this trogon here, bright red, may make it more prone to being attacked by predators, but as long as he can live long enough to convince many females to mate, this is a trade-off that he's willing to make. And sexual selection theory was first developed by Charles Darwin. There are two general classes of sexual selection. There's intrasexual selection, sometimes referred to as male-male competition, and intersexual selection, sometimes referred to as female choice. Intrasexual selection refers to within a sex, in this case males. This is where males are oftentimes duking it out among themselves to see who's the winner and gets to mate with the females. Intersexual selection refers to the fact that it's an interaction between males and females, where the males are trying to convince the female, hey, I'm the highest quality individual and you should mate with me. Let's talk about male-male competition first. These are traits that evolve through sexual selection due to contests between males. Now these contests can be either direct combat, like you see elk fighting each other with their antlers and pushing against each other, and selection for large body size is important there. Similar thing happening in bighorn sheep where they're running into each other trying to ram each other into submission. Elephant seals, the big bulls fighting for dominance on the beach. Or giraffes. Giraffes have long necks because the males with the longer necks have a bigger club for beating down their opponents. Now these direct combat traits are selected for in males, and this typically leads to sexual size dimorphism, where males are larger, males have these sexually selected traits, and females don't have them or don't have them as extreme. So for example, in the giraffes, yeah, all giraffes have long necks, but those in males are much longer. Males are much larger. Another form of male-male competition is indirect male-male competition. The best example of that is what's referred to as sperm competition. It turns out sometimes males can't physically subdue males from not getting access to females, so the females end up mating with multiple males. Well, another strategy males can do to try to ensure that more of their sperm is used to fertilize the female's ova is to try to remove the sperm of competing males. And so these are mating black-winged damselflies, and down here below are electron micrographs looking at their genitalia, the male's genitalia, and you can see that it has these brushes and scoops on it that are used to remove a previous male's sperm prior to insemination of the female with your own sperm. And it's in laboratory studies shown to be about 90 to 100% effective in removal of the competing male sperm. Well, let's move on now to female choice, intersexual selection. One of the ways that males can convince a female to mate with them is using nuptial gifts. These are food gifts used to attract females and convince them to copulate. So this is a photograph of a hanging fly which goes out and gets a prey item that then they dangle in front of flying females to try to entice them to come eat the nuptial gift, and while they're eating that nuptial gift, the males mate with them. And males that are successful at capturing large prey items mate longer with the females than males that have smaller prey items. Well, what do females have to gain by choosing among males who provide no material resources or benefits? So if they're not providing some resource like a nuptial gift, why does it matter to mate with one male or the other? Well, what the females are looking for is making sure that they're mating with the highest quality males so that they can pass on good genes to their offspring. So they're looking for some signs that the male has good genes, he's very healthy, so that their offspring will have the same condition. Well, how do the females choose among males in these situations? Again, as we talked about in communication, they're looking for honest signals of a male's health, and so that means they have to pick males with extreme traits. Remember, an honest signal is one that's costly to produce and maintain. It's not something you can lie about. And the more extreme the trait, the greater confidence the female can have that that male is of high quality. So a classic example of that is seen in peacocks. The males have these extremely long trains, feathers that have all these eye spots in them. And studies have indicated that the number of eye spots that a male has is a good indication, an honest indication of his possession of good genes for good health. And fathers with many eye spots produce longer-lived offspring. That's what's seen in this chart here. If you look at the mean area of the father's eye spots, which is an estimate of the number of eye spots, the greater the number of eye spots, you see there's a higher percentage of chicks that survive 2 years. Males with small trains, not a lot of eye spots, produce young that do not tend to live very long. All right, let's talk about the mating systems that exist in the animal kingdom. The first system I want to talk about is called promiscuity. In promiscuity, males and females will find each other, decide to mate or not. Once they mate, they kind of go their own way. There's no long-term pair bonds among males and females in promiscuity. And this is by far the most common mating system in animals. The remaining mating systems I want to talk about deal with some type of pair bond between individuals in the mating. Monogamy is a pair bond between one male and one female. Monogamy has been best studied and is most common in birds, but here's another example of this. Clown shrimps are monogamous, so that at least for one mating season, males and females will stay together. Polygamy is a general term that refers to pair bonds between multiple individuals of at least one sex. And so we can subdivide polygamy depending on the numbers of individuals of each sex that are involved. The most common form of polygamy is polygyny. Poly means many, gyne refers to females. And so this is a mating system between one male and multiple females. So elk are a good example of this. The males will battle each other for control of a harem of females. Red-winged blackbirds are a good example of this in birds, in which males will defend territories and try to recruit a number of females to establish nest in their territory. Another form of polygamy is polyandry. This is the opposite of polygyny or polygyny. In polyandry, it's many males. So this is a mating pair bond between one female and multiple males. And this is a pretty rare system. It's a good example of this is many shorebirds. This is a phalarope. And the weird thing about polyandry, everything is kind of reversed. I've been describing male-male competition and the fact that females tend to be the choosier sex. It's actually the opposite in polyandry. The females are the ones that have the exaggerated characters. The males are the ones that tend to be choosy. So it's a very different system. So in this picture here, you might have guessed that the individual on the left is the more brightly colored male, but actually that's the female. So sexual selection in this situation is the reverse of the typical pattern. And the last mating system I wanted to talk about is polygynandry. This is where there's mating pair bonds between multiple females and multiple males. So this is a more complex, elaborate system in which there's a larger family group living together of males and females that all mate with each other. And an example of that are acorn woodpeckers, which you can see in the southwestern part of the United States. You can see them in the Davis Mountains and the Chisos Mountains in West Texas. So those are what we call the social pair bond mating systems. But with genetic research, we found out that individuals oftentimes stray from these mating pair bonds. So for example, social monogamy, what appears to be going on where there's a mating and a pair bond between one male and female, doesn't always lead to genetic monogamy, meaning at least one of the individuals in the pair bond is straying from that relationship and is mating with other individuals. This leads to what we call extra-pair copulations and extra-pair fertilizations. And genetic analysis of offspring and comparing the genes to the parents has demonstrated that extra-pair copulations are pretty common, and they're seen in about 90% of bird species that we thought were truly monogamous. But what's the point of extra-pair copulation? Well, from the male perspective, it's pretty easy to see. Again, males are going to typically benefit from mating with multiple females because they can fertilize more eggs. They're gaining more in quantity. Females, on the other hand, have more subtle forms of potential benefit. Perhaps they're mated with a male that may have low sperm productivity, and so by mating with other males, they're at least guaranteeing that some of the sperm that they have will be able to fertilize their eggs, so some assurance of fertility. Or maybe you're actually mated to a lower quality male and you can sneak some copulations with a neighbor who happens to be a higher quality individual so that your young can have his better genes. All right, the next topic I wanted to cover was parental care. And the first thing I wanted to point out is parental care is actually very rare in animals. In most species, we have oviparous pattern of development in which both eggs and sperm are shed into the environment. The young zygotes, when they begin developing, they're pretty much on their own. So parental care should exist only when it can significantly increase fitness from this basic pattern of just broadcasting your gametes and letting the young develop on their own. Now that initial strategy, just broadcasting your gametes, allows you to produce lots and lots of tiny gametes. Very few of those will survive, but it's kind of a shotgun approach. You throw out a bunch of gametes, hopefully some of them are going to make it to pass on your genes to the next generation. But in some cases, parental care may allow you to produce more copies of your genes into the next generation by increasing the survival of your young. So this is seen in some frogs where you can see this individual is carrying its young to reduce predation. In birds, the young grow very quickly, and so they require lots of food being brought to them by the parents. And here we have another example in this beetle of a male that is keeping the eggs on his back so he can protect them from predators, but then also lift them out of the water into the air so they get a greater concentration of oxygen. And male seahorses and pipefish will internalize their young inside of a brood pouch to give them a nice, safe, protective area to develop. Well, what are the costs and benefits associated with parental care? Well, it takes a lot of time and energy. This may limit the number of eggs that a female can produce. So if the female would be better off just producing more eggs, and that ends up producing more surviving young, that's the route to go, and just drop parental care. But again, if you can significantly increase the survival of the young by providing some parental care, there may be some trade-off there that's worth it. You may not be able to produce as many eggs, but maybe a higher fraction of them survive. For males, parental care may really limit your ability to search out additional females and have additional matings. So that may limit the quantity of young that they can produce. And for both males and females, it could shorten your life. Parental care is extremely exhausting and extremely stressful, and that may limit your lifetime reproductive success. But again, the benefits: you may reduce the starvation rate of the young, you may allow for better hatch success, lower predation, so all of these things have the ability to increase the survival of young. Well, if care is beneficial, who should provide that care? Well, typically when you do see parental care, it's usually provided only by the females. We call this maternal care. Why is that? Well, females already have more invested in the young. Remember, the eggs are larger, they have a huge investment, so they may be more prone to establish that parental care relationship. And the males have more to gain by additional matings and less to gain by providing the parental care. Now, some species do practice what is called biparental care, where both males and females provide care, but this is exceptionally rare in the animal kingdom. The only group to which this is common are birds. And this is true because of the fact that in birds, the young grow extremely fast. They have very fast growth rates, and it typically takes two parents to bring enough food to successfully raise the young. So if one parent bails, well, the nest is prone to failure, and so it doesn't help that individual. Bailing would be a bad fitness choice. So biparental care is typically the best way to reproduce in most birds. The last thing I wanted to talk about is social interactions. And in species that live among many others of their species, how do they interact with other individuals in ways to maximize their fitness? Well, it shouldn't be surprising to you that selfish behaviors are really common in nature. The goal of all organisms is to pass on as many copies of your genes as possible. So this kind of leads to an everyone for themselves attitude in many cases. So we're going to be looking at this chart down here with various types of social interactions. And a selfish behavior would be one in which the potential social donor gains by taking advantage of a social recipient, being selfish. But if this leads to greater reproductive success of the selfish individual, then this trait should increase in frequency. A behavior in which the actor, the social donor, does something that hurts its fitness just to hurt the fitness of a social recipient, this is what we call a spiteful behavior. And spiteful behaviors are not evolutionarily stable. If you're doing something to hurt someone else, but it also hurts you, it lowers your reproductive success, how are those genes going to get spread in future generations? It's not going to be a long-term evolutionary success. Well, what about helpful behavior? Should individuals help each other? Well, if helping others helps you, we call this a mutualism. So this is a win-win situation for the social donor and the social recipient. So for example, mobbing predators. If you're running off a predator from your nest and you're in a colonial situation and your neighbor is helping you to run off that predator from your nest, well, they're also running, you're both working together to run the predator off from the area of both nests. So that's a win-win situation for everyone. We talked about the information center hypothesis and how that leads to more accurate finding of food. And one day you might be the leader and another day you're the follower. So the net is that everyone benefits in that situation. So it's a mutualism. But again, the reason the social donor is doing it is not because it helps the other individual. They're doing it because it helps them. Well, what about a behavior that may initially hurt you a little bit, but it helps the social recipient? Kind of, I'll help you now if you help me later. We call this reciprocity or reciprocal altruism. I'm going to do something that's costly for me a little bit to help you, but you're going to repay that to me in the future. Well, these kinds of systems do evolve, and a good example of that is mutual allopreening in primates. So the individual that's providing this service to a partner is establishing a relationship with this partner, and they're removing parasites from them, and it costs a little bit of time and effort to do that. But as long as they're going to get the same benefit from this individual in the future, it works out to a mutual beneficial situation. But at least initially, it is costly. Well, can you evolve behaviors that decrease your reproductive success and it increases the reproductive success of a social recipient? We call these types of behaviors altruistic behaviors, or it's altruism. How can this evolve through natural selection? Because if it's hurting your reproductive success, how are the genes for this behavior going to spread? Well, a classic example of how altruism can work in very restricted situations is seen in the Eusocial system of honeybees. In a honeybee colony, there's one queen who does all of the reproduction. Most of the bees that you see in a hive are what we call worker bees, all females that are the daughters of this queen bee, and they're all working to make sure that their mom is more reproductively successful. So they're foregoing reproduction themselves. They don't reproduce, they're just helping mom reproduce. How can this behavior be adaptive for these individuals? The key to altruism and the evolution of this behavior is the close relatedness of individuals involved. If you can help improve the fitness of close relatives, if you can make them much more successful in their reproduction, that indirectly helps you achieve your evolutionary goal. Because remember, the evolutionary goal of all organisms is pass on as many copies of your genes into future generations as possible. And close relatives, by definition, share many of the same genes that you do. So this is just an alternative route to maximizing your evolutionary goal. You may not be passing on your genes directly, but by helping a close relative have much higher reproductive success, you are passing on your genes through them. So here's an avian example of this. This is a behavior that I study called cooperative breeding in birds. And let's say that in a population, the typical female and male can produce 2 fledglings. Well, in that situation, remember, each offspring that you're producing in a sexual relationship has half of your genes, because your gametes have half of your DNA. They're haploid gametes. So by producing 2 young, you're producing 1 copy of yourself. And let's just say that's the average reproductive success of individuals in this population. But another route, potentially, is to be an altruistic individual. And let's say that this altruist is helping mom and dad. That means they're producing full siblings, full brothers and sisters. And if you think about it, these brothers and sisters have half the same DNA that you do. You're 50% related to your full brothers and sisters, which is exactly the same relatedness you would have to your own offspring. So if by helping mom and dad reproduce, you can help them more than double their reproductive success, you can't count these 2 individuals. These 2 individuals, they could have done on their own. But with your help, maybe you're bringing more food, you're protecting more the nest from predators, so that you've got these extra 3 offspring. Well, if you would have bred on your own, maybe you could have produced these. So this is just kind of canceling out what you could have done on your own. And the other two over here are the ones that your parents could have done on their own. But now we have this extra individual. This extra individual is what makes this a better strategy to be altruistic. Because in this situation, now you're producing these three individuals. Again, two of those you could have done on your own, but this extra one makes it add up to 1.5 fitness units compared to breeding on your own with just one. So in this situation, altruism is actually the best fitness tactic from an evolutionary point of view. You're passing on more copies of your genes through your parents by not breeding and just helping them be more efficient in their breeding. So in review, males and females have the same evolutionary goal to maximize fitness, but they have different tactics to achieve this goal. Males typically want to maximize the quantity of mates because sperm is cheap. Short-term commitments to mating are the way to go so that you can fertilize as many ova as possible. Females, on the other hand, want to maximize their evolutionary goal via the quality route. Ova are very limited, very valuable, and so they're going to be very choosy to make sure that they're getting the best genes and resources for the young that they can produce. And sexual selection is the evolutionary mechanism that leads to traits that have evolved for the sole purpose of increasing mating success. So in males, this is oftentimes associated with the evolution of combat structures, large body size, or in cases where it's more important to convince females to mate with you and not someone else, elaborate bright colors or elaborate displays that help sway the female in her mate choice. And oftentimes these traits are ecologically costly. So carrying around a big body size may help you fight off other males, but it may actually be very costly because it's hard to find enough food to keep that big body alive. Or having bright colorations may convince a female to mate with you, but it also attracts the attention of potential predators. In the two categories of sexual selection are intrasexual, typically male-male competition, which can either involve direct male-male combat or indirect competition through things like sperm competition. And then there's also intersexual selection, which is typically female choice. And this is where the females are very choosy, picking only the highest quality males and judging male quality by the degree of how extreme their traits are. Then we talked about the basic mating systems. What I've left out here is promiscuity, where there's no pair bonds. But when there's pair bonds, we can talk about monogamy or the three types of polygamy that we talked about. And these systems, again, are defined by the social pair bonds. But individuals can mate outside of these pair bonds, and so the genetic realities may differ from what appears to be happening socially. And this is through what we call extra-pair copulations. Parental care is rare in animals, but when benefits to offspring survival outweigh the cost, it should evolve. And the cost can be extreme in time and energy. It limits the egg production in the females, limits the number of male mating opportunities with females, and it can reduce lifespan in both sexes. When you do see parental care, it's usually given by the females because she has greater initial investment, and males have more to lose potentially by losing additional matings if they go for the parental care route, and they have more to gain by not being parents by gaining additional matings. Biparental care is exceptionally rare and is typically associated with young that require extreme amounts of care where both males and females just have to be there. And lastly, we talked about social living. Social living has potential costs and benefits that vary among species and different types of social interactions. Selfish behaviors are really common. It makes sense. If something is better for your fitness, you should do it. Spiteful behaviors are not evolutionarily stable because how could a behavior that leads to your low reproductive success and the low reproductive success of the individual you're doing this behavior with, how is that going to be evolutionarily stable? That's not an interaction we see often in nature. Mutualisms are not uncommon. Remember, this is a situation where I'm helping you, and it also helps me at the same time, so that can easily spread. But mutualisms are not always shared equally among individuals. So a group of lions may work together to take down a large prey item, but the most dominant individuals are going to get the lion's share of that food. But at least the subordinate individuals get some of the resource, and that makes it at least worthwhile for them to participate. Reciprocity is when you exchange mutualistic actions in subsequent time periods. So you do something that may cost you a little bit now to help somebody else, as long as they're going to repay that in the future. But one of the ones that may be the most difficult to understand is altruism. How you can lose direct fitness, you lose your own reproduction due to altruistic acts. That can be adaptive if the fitness gains through the production of extra relatives compensates for that loss in direct fitness or direct reproductive success. So if close relatives that you're helping, if you can significantly increase their reproductive success, well, that also helps your reproductive success indirectly, because close relatives share a large fraction of the same genes.